Hello everyone and welcome to Business Africa. I am Amel Nga. In this edition, the beer market is booming in Africa. The second largest brewery on the continent has just seen the light of day in Nigeria. Investment cost $250 million. Sino-African Economic Cooperation. Beijing promises $15 billion of non-repairable aid at the 7th summit between the economic giant and the continent. But for what consideration, we talk about it in this edition. And then South Africa reacts to the US ban on poultry exports for health and sanitation reasons. A new brewery in Nigeria, it is the second largest on the continent, behind that of South Africa. The global manufacturer Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is working to expand its presence in Africa, is already present in 15 markets, mainly in the southern, eastern and western parts. Stefan Kunye and Claudian Sono with more.
A big move to Nigeria. The world's leading beer manufacturers opened a new brewery valued at $250 million in Sagumo, Ogun State. The brewery by Anheuser-Busch InBev is the largest in Africa outside South Africa. Managers say it is strategically built to serve the growing Nigerian consumer market and its neighboring countries.
When it comes to emerging markets, Africa is key. Africa has a population of more than 1 billion people and has the fastest population growth expected among all of the regions over the next several decades. In addition, we're seeing good economic growth in many regions as well as in urbanization. This provides a unique opportunity for overall growth to the ultimate benefit of communities. We believe that we'll benefit from growth in the African continent for decades to come.
Nigerians drink 16 million hectoliters of beer a year, which is half as much as South Africans. Nigeria has a population that is more than 3 times the size of the latter, so there could be room for growth.
With an estimated trade volume of $170 billion in 2017, China, which is today Africa's largest trading partner, aims to establish itself further on the continent. Several points of this roadmap were presented by the Chinese president at the 7th China-Africa Summit held in Beijing. More details with Ruth Lago and Elaine Wangalwa. Bilateral relations between China and Africa continues to grow. The Asian giant has increasingly courted Africa as it seeks out resources and new markets. Since 2000, China has extended about $125 billion of loans to the continent. China has provided aid to Africa since the Cold War period, but Beijing's presence in the region has grown exponentially with its emergence as a global trading power. The country has passed Europe and the United States as the biggest trading partner of most African countries. The Asian giant has been the largest trading partner for Africa for 9 consecutive years. In the first 6 months of this year, trade volume between China and Africa exceeded $98 billion, up 16% year-on-year, according to the Commerce Ministry. Recently, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced $60 billion in financial support to African countries and written off debt for the continent's poorer nations. The announcement was made during the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation (FOCAC) in Beijing. While relations between China and African nations are broadly positive, concerns have intensified about the impact of some of Beijing's deals in the region. To talk about it, let's join online from the French capital, Dogard Dugui, president of the Africa SMB Forum platform. Hello and welcome to Business Africa.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Mr. Dogard, trade between Africa and China increased by 14% to reach $170 million in 2017. What is your assessment of these increasingly close exchanges between the two?
We need to know how much we are benefiting from inclusive growth and employment in Africa. These are exchanges that are unavoidably unbalanced because China's needs are immense. But it is also up to us. I urge the Africans to determine the framework for these exchanges. And then China, has been Africa's leading trading partner since 2008. But it is also the first to hold American debt. So it is a global power, not to mention the fact that it's the first one we're going to need to count on.
The Chinese president also announced $60 billion in public aid, including $15 billion in non-repayable aid, including interest-free credits and concessional loans. What should we expect in return?
You know, there's never any help as it is. There's always a catch. The concern is that Africa must set its own agenda and enforce it. Africa needs support, partners for its development, just as all parts of the world have at any one time or another needed the contribution of the other from foreigners. The only thing is that African countries must go in close, common ranks, a kind of collective, at least at the sub-regional level. And then, once again, I say it on their own agenda. The important thing is not to simply ask for help or investment, to take on debt or donations. For what purpose? What is the purpose of this debt and investment?
Trade volume reached $98.8 billion for the January to June period this year, a 16% year-over-year increase. This relationship is far too unbalanced, according to several economists who see it as tied aid.
Yes, of course. It is an unbalanced relationship. It's connected. But we cannot blame China, like all other countries. Whether they are emerging powers like China itself, Brazil, Turkey, India, or Western powers like the European Union and the United States, for leveraging on their influence. And it is in their interest to have money passing through. But Africa can also position itself, because the most important thing in the balance is that we rely on our own strength before turning to partners. It is a continent that already has too many micro-states with very small economies. Stronger integration is needed, and one day perhaps that will allow Africa to have an impact, particularly by relying on the enormous wealth of its soil. Therefore, the potential when African countries exploit their wealth must be weighed in the balance of the negotiations. It must be leveraged on, otherwise it will always be unbalanced trade volumes, aid, donations, but we still need to know what the financial flows that arrive in Africa are used for.
The increasing rush of African governments suggests a risk of over-indebtedness of these African countries, which are in some ways entering a new dependency on China. Can we speak of a repetition of the Western hold?
After the Western grip, the Chinese grip, okay. But you know that no help is negative. I would say if it is devoted to investment in sectors such as technology, research, new technologies, artificial intelligence, energy, agricultural productivity, or health, that is, if these sectors in which there is investment, there is no harm in getting into debt. But if it is a question of debts over 15, 20 or 30 years that serve to make ends meet for African states, but we might as well adapt our economies to their resources and make progress. But the most important thing is to invest in what creates jobs in the long term, and even more so, those who talk about excessive debt, especially in the West, are indebted themselves.
Thank you, Doga Dogui, for answering our questions.
Thank you. See you soon.
After the break, we will go to South Africa, which is waging a trade war with the United States over imported poultry. See you shortly.